Hi, thank you. Welcome, not only to the people here in the audience with us, but this is being streamed live from the Lundahl site, so welcome everybody at home. I'm going to do some quick introductions and then we'll get things rolling. And I think I might as well just start with Chris Wright, who is at this end, and we'll work around this way. Chris received a BS in Sound Engineering and Production from Birmingham City University, but today he, more importantly, is the sound engineer, sound designer for the work that Proscenium that you're working on right now. And then here is Martina, of course, Christer, and representing the audience who has experienced a number of their works is Malin Zim, who's sitting right here. She's an architect and critic and a researcher of the architecture of the mind at the Architecture Museum. Do you want to explain what that is?
Well, it sounds pretentious, but I think we're all architects in our minds. You know, when you read a book, you read a novel, and then you see the film based on that novel, and you go, well, the spaces didn't look like this. I'm quite sure these rooms were bigger. These streets didn't look like this, and the lights came from the other way, which means that you have already established an architecture in your own mind. So this is what my field of research has been about before.
Okay. By way of introduction, I have a confession to make. Maybe because of the years I spent in New York City, or because I was so influenced by Joseph Beuys and Vito Acconci, I became allergic to performance art and consistently refused to go because it just never paid off after year. And so a friend of mine, the curator at Magazine 3, Leif Stoltz, told me that I should be over to the National Gallery to see Symphony of a Missing Room, and I read about it. You guys don't even know this, I haven't confessed it. I read about it, and it sure looked like performance art to me. And so I said to Leif, no, I'm not going to go. And if you know Leif, you know she can be persuasive and persistent, and ultimately I went, and I have to say it was a transformative experience. So the only reason I'm sitting here today is because Leif Stoltz forced me to go, and I'm so happy that she did, and I've now followed their work with great enthusiasm and have written about it as well. What we're going to do is begin with Malin's description of a work, or works, I guess, that you've seen, and then we're going to turn things over to Martina and Christer for an introduction, and then I'm going to start some questions for everybody, okay?
Thank you. The setting of the scene starts well before you are equipped by any technological devices. There's always a reception, a waiting room of sorts, a friendly place with a very anticipatory atmosphere. The small group of audience members share this waiting room, and you have no idea who's planted and has a host or hostess role. The anticipation and unwinding of this space is like sitting on the branch just before you fall into the rabbit hole. Once the equipment, either goggles or headphones or both, are fitted, and you're called to follow, the falling begins. Lundahl and Seitl are very aware of their responsibility in this space they are creating, so the descent is quite controlled, taking enough time to enable a certain getting used to. And as architects of our minds, they take great care in creating trust in this space and its inhabitants. The guiding voice is soft, but dependable. It sounds like a mix between a child and a mermaid. You walk tentatively, more cautious and aware of the distance between your head and your feet as ever. And the darkness is so thick that the eyes have no chance of adjusting, not even after 20 minutes in that space. Sound and touch is what I rely on. It's difficult to tell whether I'm looking or walking with my eyes closed. The deprivation of vision is a remarkable experience in itself. The modality of vision is quite dominant in our culture in any scale and visual communications surrounding us. You enter into this restful darkness, and that's a complete contrast to the pace and rhythm that normally occupies the brain. The pace is a bit like swimming underwater, and this darkness form the structural components of this space. Once the dimension is established, The audience can be gently guided back into real spaces, into bright light and the populated spaces of reality, and then brought back again without breaking the magic. You do encounter people in this architecture. From the waiting room, you recognize some people, and the others, well, actors, dancers, performers from anywhere in the world. But they all have this ability of creating trust and sincerity, even in complete darkness. I wonder how they do that. The virtual reality of Lundahl Seitl is a place where you reach out into the darkness and find a hand. And that hand gently guides you into the next phase of the experience. And this hand in the dark is an infinitely richer sensation than these endless racks of guns that sweep by in the Matrix. And all, as the mind searches for references, all comparisons seem very banal. I did think of the Matrix once, but this white and violent space where this anything you wish for rushes by in huge quantities is just not fit for this warm and trustful place that is created. Trust is such a scarce commodity nowadays. Wherever the labyrinth of seamless technology takes you in the end, this experience stays with you. Strangely enough, the goggles and headphones don't interfere with the narrative. In these spaces, I have been transformed into a child, a tree, a ghost, a visitor, a graceful mind. I've been a performer, a voice, and a heavily resting body. I have been fumbling, groping, shuffling for a moment, when my thoughts have rushed for outside references, but I always found my way back to this state of purity. And more intensely experiencing this architecture of the mind that I could ever have hoped for in my research. It is about the letting go, the reaching out, and the following without fear.
Thank you. I wanted just to say briefly something about my experience with Symphony of a Missing Room. It was, as I said before, transformative, and it also left me quite puzzled, and very few works of art leave me puzzled. I don't know exactly what it was. It's not performance art, it's not theater, and that's something we want to explore today, is how we might, I don't want to capture it or lock it down, but how we might describe the experience. And it is an experience. And I am a part of a small group at konstverk called the Experience Design Group. And we've had both Krista and Martina to teach for us because of the emphasis that they place on the experience of their work. And finally, just to say, the most surprising element for me of Symphony of Missing Room was right at the end when they took off the goggles and there were other people standing there, the people I began with, who I knew were there, but I completely lost a sense of being a part of the group, but rather always being on the very leading edge of a very personal experience. And we'll talk more about that as we go ahead. But you guys are going to begin with an introduction.
Yeah. I will add a little bit on some information about me and Martina and our practice. And thank you, Ron and Malin, for amazing description of our work. I will just begin with saying that my background is as a visual artist. Martina has been working with choreography. And at the time when we started to work together 7 years ago, we both felt a bit of a dissatisfaction with the areas where we both are working from. I from the gallery and the visual art, and Martina with choreography and with the theater. We wanted to change the way we use museums and theater, but still building on a tradition and rituals of those spaces. We were asking questions of autonomy, that is the condition of existence of a work of art. The kind of work we had in mind could only take substance in proximity to the visitors. And to make this description a little bit easier, I will divide the work we do into strands. One where we build up a contained space in which we often work with darkness, as Malin described, making the space controllable. When we want these visitors to use their vision and see things, and when we want them to experience with other senses. and another type of work in which a public space is punctured, like a museum or a theater. By locating our work parallel to or within these existing sites and situations, we give a new instruction on how to navigate these places and what we can expect from our experience when being inside them. Two keywords in our practice is multisensory stimulation and sensory deprivation. By deprivation or removing a sense like vision and then controlling the input of the remaining senses through a three-dimensional sound and synchronized touch and movement, we can create the illusion of that what the visitor experiences as real, whether it's a person, a touch, or a sense of space that is not there from an objective point of view, but is experienced as real. This is an example how the brain can construct one coherent experience of reality through a process of multisensory binding of different sensory inputs. And if something is missing in the information, the brain will then just fill in from previous experience. In our work, the absent part could be sometimes what defines the experience. One can say that we, in our work, is choreographing absences. It is also precisely the visitor's previous experience, your storage of visual memory and the body memory, and with the help of imagination that functions as transmitters, it makes it possible for us to compose more complex, perhaps new experiences within our work using past experience. Here the power of suggestion is coming into working. For example, the experience of vertigo when being on a height, looking down, is something most people can relate to, even just when I'm speaking about it right now. And also sometimes the experience of, if I would say, ask you to imagine biting through a sour lemon, feeling the sour, dry taste in your mouth, you might just feel that, experience that right now as well when I'm talking about it, and even though there is no real lemon involved. In a way, one can say this lived experience is our palette to use, creating a relation with the more abstract sense of the world. How, for example, do we experience a sensation of touch isolated without the social complications from the situation that it arises from? How would you, for example, experience a touch in relation to a voice that floats around in a room in complete darkness, whispering?
Imagine a hand on your back.
Just before the hand almost touches your back. When it's done in the right condition and is carefully choreographed, it makes our imagination extend into physical perception of the body. All of this is possible because of the tight connection between imagination and memory, seeing and doing, which also is the principles of the world of theater.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I will talk a bit more about what we will do here for Dramaten. And we are right now in a process of creating this work. And we've been so far tight in giving it the title Proscenium. And in this work, we are in a way breaking apart the agreement of the proscenium theater, that the actors on stage are physically separated from the audience. You might have heard Krista mention the word visitor. A visitor is a word we use to give the name for the audience, because we feel that they are visiting the work and they walk through it rather than just looking at it. And in our work, Proscenium, then, which we are right now creating, it is never clear where the actual place of performance is being located. Are you, as a visitor, on or off stage? Are you an observer, or are you being observed? It is a kind of a strange place where subject and object are being blurred, because in a way, as a visitor, you can potentially become both. So this work is site-specific to this building, and also site-specific to the theater, and the theater as an art form in itself. And our actual starting point is this building and its people, the history, the traditions and the rituals we've been observing, everything from people working backstage, actors and people working in offices, and also the inherent knowledge that's being passed on. And we've been spending so much time just walking around in these corridors and getting lost and finding really odd, unexpected spaces. And we've been listening to the building, and we've also been recording these sounds, which we will use later possibly. And we've been speaking a lot to the people working here, and we've also been working with the actors, which has been very interesting because they carry the knowledge of the building, because some of them spent many years here. We even been recording sometimes, we recorded Spöksonaten at Lilla Scene, the small stage, from underneath the stage. And that, apart from just recording the sound, it was really interesting just to observe the negative space of a performance. You use all the scenes that you wouldn't see as an audience. We saw kind of understage where the actors prepared, and that was an experience and an inspiration in itself. But being here, I very often felt like walking around here, I felt that I lost my sense of time. And not only because the logic of this space differs so much from a normal building, but also because a lot of these windows are being covered. I mean, we have no windows out to the outside world here. So it's closed off to give space for more imagination. So it is for me like a portal into any possible space, time, and world. I think, Malin, you mentioned the word matrix, which I find interesting. And an actor working here at Dramaten, she once said that, the room next to us, which is the main stage, Stora Scen, she didn't perceive it as a physical room because she felt that the inner measurements of that room, of the stage, exceeded or felt bigger than the outside measurements. And relating this to our work, like for example, how does concepts such as the observer and the observed exist within our work? And I would maybe say that that's rather divided in time rather than space. And for example, some parts of proscenium will happen in complete darkness. And here we experiment maybe more this time with displacing the voice from its actual source. Sometimes we even displace your voice as a visitor's away from its originating body and placing it into the body of the other. So to give you an example, if you enter the work with a family, with someone you know, you could suddenly hear your friend's voice, but with the wrong body. This happens in the dark, so you can't see. And this makes you maybe wonder to which location is your own voice being projected into, and where is it received? And where is the listener in this case? So in a way, a sort of ghostly duplication or even multiplication of yourself, because you do not know how far you extend into the space. Martin Thomasson wrote in an article in Svenska Dagbladet that, I'm going to go into technology now, that technology has made us accustomed to spend time with ghosts. And in our everyday life, through our constant confrontation with technology, it has taught us to blur the boundary in between what it means to be present and absent, even sometimes blurring the boundary in between the living and the dead. And in our work, you may not always be sure if the voice you hear in the headphones is embodied or not. So is there a consciousness behind the voice? Because we also will work with live and the recorded, and the contradiction in that. So do we have the ability to sense and differentiate if there is a consciousness hiding within that voice? Or can we feel if it's just an empty shell where no one is at home? That's my question, I think, at the moment.
Okay, thank you. You're done?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Can we get the first image? I want to begin in an unlikely place for a conversation like this. This is a sprinter who is a double amputee, and he's attached carbon fiber legs so that he can sprint. And this is a part of a general movement called transhumanism, often represented by a big H and a plus, human plus something. And in this case, the plus are these legs. And you may be familiar that sprinters, normal human sprinters, are up in arms about this because in most instances they can run faster than a healthy human or a human with both of their legs. And so all sorts of questions rise up about this. And Martina and Krista and I had spent an hour or hour and a half together just talking about what we were going to talk about today. But as often happens, and this is the part I was saying, I am troubled a little bit about where to place their work legitimately so that people really understand it. And I've decided that they are the first or amongst the first to create transhumanist art. And in that sense, let me explain what I mean by that. This is an international cultural movement that's been described like this, that affirms the possibility and desirability of fundamentally transforming the human condition by developing and making widely available technology to greatly enhance human intellectual, physical, and psychological experiences. And I think that's a pretty good description of their work. Transhumanists thinkers study the potential benefits and dangers of emerging technologies that could overcome human limitations. And they predict that eventually we will be able to so transform human experience that we will be in a period known, or will be in experiences known as post-human, after the human experience. And finally, a proponent of transhumanism, Ronald Bailey, describes the movement, and I'm quoting now, as a movement that epitomizes the most daring, courageous, imaginative, and idealistic aspirations of humanity. And again, I think that's an apt description of the kinds of projects that you undertake. So in light of this formidable enhancement that Mullins talked about, and both of you as well, that you trigger through technology, with Chris's help, how do you react to the notion that your work is transhuman?
I think that maybe it prepares. I cannot see our work as an investigation in humanity, what it means to be human.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in one way we are also touching upon things that is extrasensory, or that is to be called supernatural,
Mm-hmm.
which we don't think is supernatural, and many scientists as well, like Rupert Sheldrake, who is a biologist studying biology, actually just exploring those areas,
Mm-hmm.
which is the taboo of science. For example, telepathy, for example, just saying that it is a natural phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
But studying humanity, or like studying what humanity can be, and how we can extend our capacity without the technology, or like body technology like yoga, for example, or
Mm-hmm.
how you can think differently. I think one can be prepared to enter a more technologically enhanced world,
Okay.
where things are moving faster, and when we experience change at a more quicker speed. I mean, it's just like a reality that is completely not what it used to be.
Mm-hmm. And then does that become an acceptable level of reality, this transhuman reality?
How do you mean?
Well, since it's a different kind of reality, but is it as real as, say, normal course of human experience? Or is it more real? Is it
You mean
hyper-real?
the visions that transhumanists have?
Yeah, or your work.
Or our
The
work?
experience of your work.
Well, I think it can change the consciousness of the type of consciousness that the person that is into the work is having,
Mm-hmm.
the state that they are into completely, like yoga can do, or like a shamanic
Mm-hmm.
ritual can do, or like someone that is going on a mental journey. But in our work, we are also really interested how that mental, or the journey of the mind, the visualization you can do, how it can extend out to the physical space, out
Mm-hmm.
to the architecture. So you actually are an image, like a mental image, can become a physical reality.
Mm-hmm. Martina?
Yeah, I'm thinking what I find really important is because technology is really developing quickly. And what I found very important not to forget is to also look into the body's natural abilities and capabilities that we can do also without technology. And because we know still very little about what the body is still a mystery. We don't know what consciousness is, and we might not even know what thinking is. So for me it's very important to understand and look back, what is it that we have lost through the very advanced use of technology, and how can we remember that again, and kind of doing that wisely as well, because there's a potential danger in that. And then also I would like to say that me and Krista has a very low-tech background. I mean, I come from a choreographic background, and here, I mean, I work a lot with kind of the body and how we can simply shift our experience of reality very simply by closing our eyes. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly our senses feel more sharp. Or I also been working a lot with Rudolf Laban's movement scientist, and his system of how to relate to weight, space, time, and flow. And by just shifting our weight, if we, for example, go to the museum and I put more weight into my feet, the way I enter the exhibition or I feel about it might feel entirely different. So, but then the way we use it maybe in our work is to then first, we often start our rehearsals by trying different physical exercises where intuition is a very important aspect. And then when we feel that we understand a little bit more about what we want to do, then we might start adding technology. So, for example, if I go back to Symphony of a Missing Room, the work we did for the museum, we first trained the performers to, through their bodies, embody the architecture that is in the recording, even though that architecture didn't correspond with the real space. And then we added the three-dimensional sound of that architecture that they were embodying. So in a way, the combination in between the physical body and the technology. But what I feel maybe now with the work we're doing for Dramaten Proscenium has suddenly gone really much more high-tech than it has before, where we start to work with the displacement of the voice, which I mentioned before, and to project your voice into many locations at the same time. But in a way, we do this in everyday life without thinking about it, on Skype, on emails. So maybe in a way, for me, the space that you enter in this particular work we do here is almost like a physical version of that, where we maybe make it less familiar. Because if we think about the history of technology, the first time someone heard their mother on the phone, it was a very strange experience, almost ghostly experience for them. Or the photographs when they arrived first, some people believe that it took their soul away. So how to make that, what we're using every day, making it more unfamiliar again? I don't exactly know what that means yet, because we are in the process.
Okay. Mom did such a great job contextualizing your work to give the audience a sense of the experience itself. But I think everyone would like to hear also some more practical parts of your work. What are your historical and critical influences? Because, as I've said before, it's not performance art, it's not really theater, but where do your influences come from?
Well, not so much from art and theater, actually. One writer in the Indian version of like the Bangalore Time Out wrote about us, saying that for the uninitiated, the practice of Lundahl Seitl may sound as walking into a science fiction saga. And so yeah, and science fiction is an inspiration, and so are science. And I think maybe we are really interested in actually that science fiction and science with time science may with times be fiction, and fiction may with time be science.
So are there particular pieces of literature or films or
Yeah, Andrei
Dance.
Tarkovsky's Solaris has been a big influence. A lot, actually. What else?
Yeah, Werner Herzog's, I think it's called Heart of Glass, where the entire crew of actors were under hypnosis when they recorded the film. So you can really sense that through the film. But also, I mean, I've been inspired by going to a lot of workshops simply by art practitioners or by choreographer where they work with perceptions of the body. I also attended a lot of Buddha workshops, which I've been inspired by, not necessarily Buddha as something to look at, but something to do myself. And the reason is because it made me access my own kind of inner world and own images, which then inspires what we create. So as a trigger into something that I feel, experience as if it comes from me. Another thing, of course, what you mentioned before, Chris, is science. And then sometimes in the process of making decisions, I feel music is important. And I sometimes forget that I used to play the piano as a child, but I was never good at all. But it doesn't matter. It's kind of, today, I feel that the rhythm of touch and absence of touch for me becomes a feeling of musicality, and sometimes it just feels wrong. You know, like when you're playing the piano and this feels wrong, and then you adjust yourself a little bit and that feels right. And that's how sometimes I feel in the process of making decisions, which again could be a bit problematic, because then there's like a clear, it's more clear what works and not. Maybe it's, I have to think about that.
Can I add something from my point of view? Being, as I said before, working with the visual arts and sort of being used to going to seeing exhibitions in galleries most of the time, and then actually meeting Martina and being a couple with Martina was starting to see performance art and things on the stage, seeing things that were actually like a more kind of a direct relation to somehow to me as a visitor. Made me think about how can I felt, and then I realized that that there might be another way for me as a visual artist to bring the viewer or the visitor somehow closer to in my process. Feeling quite isolated in the studio and then showing a work in the gallery. And I'm quite interested in the gallery as an open plan space when the theater is being something like we're experiencing now. I'm sitting here, you're sitting there. But the gallery being a space that is three-dimensional, that you walk around in. Still, of course, having a lot of instructions in the way how you do access the work. Yes, thinking about the two mediums and then thinking about how can you actually create something different? How can you actually create a work of art that was somehow immaterial, that was not an object that you related to your subject to, but actually something that was questioning your own subjectivity somehow. That's something.
I'm just curious, how many people in the audience have actually experienced a work? Oh, wow.
Wow.
Okay. The fan club is here. That's great. One of the reasons that I brought up transhumanism is because of its ambiguity. You know, where does human experience begin and end in this picture, and where does human experience begin and end in their work when suddenly it becomes, you're immersed in this enhanced experience. And this sense of ambiguity is everywhere in your work, and we could begin with the theater. I mean, the Dramaten is a place, it is a building, but it's also an imaginary place, time and time again. And we were talking about proscenium the other day, that the theater is in effect playing itself, I think Martina said. But you take that farther, creating this kind of paradox between time and space. Can you guys talk about that, the paradox, as we were talking about it the other day?
Well, I can maybe start a little bit. Well, the starting point for making proscenium is from starting in the theater. Likewise, how the starting point to make Symphony of Missing Room was in the museum. And I guess we started to look at those buildings' different sense of relating to time and space themselves first. So where you have the museum, which is a place that that always has been looked at as the sort of the keeper of history, with the objects that it stores there, and thinking about the objects as them being somehow always been almost like being put outside of time in the museum because it's kept by the museum. But then when we were, so that's the starting point where I wanted to enter in the museum. We wanted somehow like to put in the visitors into the history of art rather than looking at an art. So almost like going through the traverse layers of the art history itself. Mm-hmm. And with the proscenium has a completely different relation to time and space. I mean, in the theater uses time itself as a medium to show a work. Something happens on stage and then it disappears. We were interested in the traces it leaves, and also the habits that is created in the building somehow. Do you want to continue?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the habits in the building now, remembering meeting people here and speaking to actors and how telling me how important it is to clear after yourself after a rehearsal, because if you leave traces, it will be very difficult for the next group to come in, because there will be a different tension in the room, which makes me think of that paradox of space, that you have a real space and then you project an imaginary space into that, so they're kind of a double reality. And then when you remove the vision, where you're in a dark space or you have a blindfold, there is you can project that imaginative space to that location. It becomes almost like a black box where anything is possible. But in a way, you don't know where your feet are walking. You don't know the real location. But I guess you might be aware of that doubleness. If taking an example from a reality that everyone does every day, is to sleep and dreaming. In a way, when we dream, we are in our bed sleeping, and then we are dreaming, so we are at two locations simultaneously. But the difference is here that you're normally not aware that you are dreaming unless you have a lot of lucid dreaming, which is also interesting. And then there is a paradox of time as well, because sometimes the sounds that we use do actually originate from the sounds that you are within, but there's a paradox because they are delayed in time. So what you hear is from past times, which means that you could hear footsteps and voices that are not existed there once, but they are not there any longer. So that's the recorded. But what's going to happen now in proscenium, which will make it a bit more complex, and what I'm trying to understand, that we will mix what is live and recorded. And sometimes even the same voice, like if my voice would actually be recorded sometimes, and then it would be live at points. But now we work more with the actors' voices as well, which gives us much more possibilities.
Okay. And I want to go back to this notion of ambiguity, because, and pick up on something that both of you mentioned. When you're going through this experience, time is displaced. Suddenly you're in the past, or you feel like you're in the past, but of course it's constantly in the present moment as the experience evolves. And you can put people in two different time zones, let's say, at once. Can you just talk about that a little bit? And also along with that, or maybe next to it, the ambiguous role that you give the audience in proscenium. We talked a lot about that, and I think that would be interesting to hear about. And let me also say, there's going to be time for questions from the audience, so start thinking.
Do you want to say that?
The ambiguous role of the visitor. I think what has been very important here, because we've been working with the actors closely, and so one curiosity has been to ask them, what is your experience of standing on stage? And for them, a very common question is during, how is the audience? How was the audience tonight? So they very often have an immediate sense when they come up on stage of the audience, how they project back. They become specialists and extremely intuitive about sensing the audience. And but sometimes it's like opening a fridge. Someone described like a sensation. And what is also interesting that they describe, they cannot see the faces of the audience in all productions because they're blinded with the light. So this experience has been very important for us in our process because we want to put the visitor into the ambiguity of not knowing if they are the observer or if they are being observed. So they don't know that the boundaries of what is on and off stage are not that clear. And maybe it's like in the theater is more divided in space, but I think maybe in proscenium, in this work, it could possibly be, if it's divided somehow, it is more divided in time than in space, I think. And also, like speaking about the dark room, which you will enter at times, sometimes the dark room becomes just a dark room, which is integrated in, and you talk about it as a dark room, and then sometimes it's suddenly a portal into someone's memory, the visitor's memory, a potential space. And sometimes it collapses back into the black box and the dark.
Hearing a microphone taking up sound from that room.
Oh yeah.
And the interesting thing is there that because everything has been so mediated all the time, you have been, for example, been able to walk inside a memory that you describe, and all the sound that you are talking, describing how you describe the space will be fed into your headphones in a three-dimensional sound. So you experience vividly that you are walking inside your memory. Your voice would be the echo of your voice would be the echo, the reverb of that particular space. If you say that you're walking in a snowy landscape with your dad when you're small, there will be that sound of your footsteps, and it would be also the sound of your voice in that space. And interesting here that then, because we are in a theater, if you take that imaginary space away and collapse it down to the black box again, picking up the live sound from the microphone there, that will sound all of a sudden really, in one way you would feel, where are you present then? Like, are you present there then, or does that feel very... Or do you feel almost like that you are? I think once again in like sort of like a matrix. I think on one of those science fiction films. I think there could be a space where you sort of like put outside of reality.
We used to call it the in-between space when we rehearsed it with the performers. Or didn't we call it the in-between space?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. The fuzzy border between imagination and...
Yeah, when you have been so fed by a mediated reality so much, and when that sort of stops, the feed stops, then almost you feel like you're pushed out of reality.
Yeah. I want to get to technology with Chris, but could you guys, the two of you, give us just a short or brief description or narrative of what prosceniums, the experience of prosceniums might be? Not the entire event, but maybe just pull out a piece.
I'm wondering if I should not just explain another piece, or...
No, I think proscenium.
Proscenium.
What do you think?
Whatever you wish.
Okay, whatever.
It's hard to sort of explain. I mean, it's also, I don't want to reveal too much of it. Okay. So maybe I should describe another thing, how we can work with technology. I will describe Symphony of a Missing Room at one instance where the visitor is asked, well, at this point in the work, the visitor has headphones on, and have just encountered the hand in relation to the voice that speaks to them. The voice is three-dimensionally surrounding them. And the voice is asking the visitor to crouch down because there is a narrow passage in front. And they crouch down, and what happens is that it's an interesting thing there, because there is a suggestion, there is a narrow passage in front of you, you have to crouch down to create an image in the mind of the visitor. And not only is created an image, but also there is a three-dimensional sound when they finally pass through that is going to confirm that suggestion. So they have an image in their mind, and also there is a physical sound space around them that does that. But a third thing that also confirms and also strengthens the experience is that when they're crawling into that narrow space, they're crawling also into their own archive of lived experience of being in such spaces with the tension in their muscles of being there. And so there is a kind of a feedback loop of different sensory inputs there. And I think in neurology there is a notion called, there is a concept of ideodynamic response, which is saying what the instructions or like suggestions can create a physical experience. And I think in our work there is a kind of a feedback loop of that concept, because also not only are the suggestions creating an image and a physical response, but also the response itself feeds back to the image somehow. So it's, I think that's something that can describe something to do how we work with technology. So that technology involves of instruction, three-dimensional sound, touch, and also movement, but also just the awareness that how you plan a situation, to be aware about what someone is going to experience in a certain situation, and to plan that with the type of touch and movement that you're using.
Can we turn to you, Chris? We've been talking about this paradox between time and space. We've been talking about this kind of ambiguity or experience of ambiguity. How do you use technology to affect that?
Okay, so I think firstly, I'm going to say the ambiguity could be perceived as almost a downside or a negative to the piece. But I think it's definitely a merit to the piece, because the ambiguity almost makes it more memorable and interesting for when the visitors walk away. For me, from a technical aspect, reasserting this main factor of ambiguity almost comes from making the technology as invisible as possible and removing any intrusions that technology may make to the piece. Say, if somebody hears something and, say the quality is different, or there's a problem with the wireless system that I'll describe in a moment, that could be a distraction from the experience and take you out of that space that we've just spent half an hour transporting you to. One of the key things that we were using in the recent rehearsals was a software called Altiverb for the memory section that Krista was describing, which is one of the main software programs we use for transporting people through various spaces. One technique we can use we can travel around ourselves and capture different acoustic spaces. One technique is using a starter pistol, and if somebody stands at one end of the room with a starter pistol and fires it, Krista could stand at the other end of the room with a handheld recorder, and we can actually capture the acoustic fingerprint, or impulse it's called, of that space. And like a human fingerprint, every space has got a different acoustic impulse of its own. Using that technique, we can then load that into the Altiverb software, and using a digital link from the mixer to the computer, we can actually put your voice into that space live. So whether that's the main theatre here that we are looking at capturing, or whatever space we want to transport you to, we're going to build up a library on the computer of those spaces, and it's very easy to hot swap between all of those during the performance. I think from my perspective, making the ambiguity more concrete, I suppose you could say, comes from making the technology invisible, so it's not distracting for when you take part in the piece. Okay.
Did you want to describe that?
Yeah, sure. This is a diagram I've made. This is kind of a simplistic overview of the signal in this piece. So if we look from the top, out, and we use the Neumann KU100 dummy head. For those of you who aren't from a technical background or aren't familiar with that product, it's a very accurate model of a human head. It looks quite a scary thing like that. and it's got omnidirectional microphones at the entrance to its ear canals. So the idea is that if you could record something with that head or use it in a live context like we do, when that gets listened back to on headphones, the localization of everything in the space where the head was used is meant to be as realistic as possible. So in our piece, where the two heads are in a completely separate room to where you're actually standing in the piece, there are live actors acting out rehearsals or interacting with the visitors. When they speak, either from the front or from a certain side, it's meant to be a far more realistic way of you perceiving that person kind of standing there, or when they get close to your ear, or standing behind you. So in the bottom section, this is the actual space where the visitors will be standing. At the moment, we're using 4 visitors grouped into 2 wireless systems. That gives us the flexibility in parts of the piece. Everybody hears the same thing, but then in certain sections of the piece, the wireless systems split. So one pair of people could be listening to a rehearsal in acoustic space 1, and the other group of people could be listening to a rehearsal in acoustic space 2, which creates more ambiguity, we notice, because when the visitors talk about the piece afterwards, they say, "Did you hear that? Somebody said something to me," and they're like, "Oh no, I was listening to completely something else." Or if they refer to the visitors by name, the other group are listening to completely something else.
Within the piece, they could also, being in the different spaces, they can say that I'm seeing this now, while I'm seeing this, not only afterwards, but also within the piece.
Yeah.
They exist in this dark space, but in different spaces.
Yeah, because we could, using, it's not demonstrated here, but with the digital link to the laptop, we could use as many instances of Altiverb as the computer could take before it kind of goes up in flames. And we could, when we multiply this out for further rehearsals and have more and more groups of people, they could all be in different acoustic spaces and create more ambiguity when they discuss the piece afterwards. We also use speakers in the space to give a different localization effect. Switching certain, whether that's playback or the live stimulus, switching to speakers in a space, so maybe encouraging people to walk towards that source instead of it being in the headphones. And we also utilise an Earthworks mic, with another omnidirectional microphone in the space where all the visitors are. If we want to relay that in their headphones to experience, say, their own footsteps, or when they call out, if we want to relay a more distant version, and we want to place them in the space that they are actually standing in. So that's like the non-Altiverb side of the piece. Also, the 4 visitors wear wireless lavalier microphones, which go back to wireless receivers, and that's so obviously we can apply processing to their voice, and they can communicate back if the actors refer to them by name, or when they're going through the memory section where they discuss a memory and they get transported to this acoustic space. We obviously need those microphones as like a close mic on the visitor, for them to communicate clearly back to the actors. And all the actors and people in the rooms are on wireless ear packs as well, so everybody can hear what's going on. And the actors that are in each space, we call it head 1 and head 2. They're appropriate to whichever wireless system group 1 or group 2 would be on. So when the parts of the piece come where the wireless systems split and the 2 groups are listening to completely different things, the actors' listening system also follows that split as well.
It's hard to imagine, but we're almost out of time, and I want to leave some time for questions. But let me ask a final question to the 3 of you. When we talked the other day, we were talking about some often stroke victims lose part of their vision, and so they actually can only see a half of this bottle. But referring back to the archive of memories, your brain is quite remarkable and will supply the other half because it remembers that a bottle has two halves to it. It's fairly common in stroke victims. And I'm wondering if you could talk about the three of you doing that through technology, either metaphorically or actually tricking the visitor or tricking the visitor's brain to replace sensations that you have actually taken away.
Well, I think so. I mean, the scenario of crawling down that narrow space, many people have said that they have felt a smell of damp or mold in there. We don't give any senses like that in the piece, but I mean, I think that's definitely because we are quite accurate with all of the other information we give, the brain easily can fill in that.
Can you think of another example?
We always refer back to a strong parallel in real life and to this piece that me and Krista always talk about is, say if you were in a hotel room and you flick the light switch and the light goes either on or off, as long as there's no either time difference or nothing else on show, your brain just fills in the gap that you just turned on and off that light, where there could actually be somebody in the middle who's turning on and off the light, and that switch does nothing. But because you can't see anything else, you don't bother thinking about it, and the light, you just assume that light switch operates that light. So I think that's one strong parallel to this piece, is the technology is not, we try and make the technology not so obvious, so your brain's not thinking about what we're trying to do with you, and you just kind of get on with it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
so I mean, it's really, I mean, our work is in a way based on that our brains are capable of doing this. And that is what illusion is, the function of an illusion. And what I'm interested in, if our brains have such a capacity to override reality, then I'm thinking about what is really reality, and that goes back to kind of the origin of and the existential questions that are our driving force for creating. And another thing I'm questioning is, in 100,000 years, would still this work? Just from a viewpoint that I think because our brains they haven't really adapted to the very advanced technological situation that we have, so therefore the brain thinks this can't be a coincidence, therefore I'm projecting a new reality into it. But maybe through evolution is really slow, so maybe in 100,000 years this will not work at all. It's a question.
Great, thank you. Is there a question or two from the audience? When I ask for questions from students at Konstverk, I get what I describe as the Great Nordic Silence. It takes them a while to cook up a question. Does anybody have one? Yes.
When you did Symphony of Amazing Room, I assume you work with dancers.
That was...
you work with dancers.
Yeah.
And now you work with actors. Is there a difference, or is there a reason for you to choose either dancers or actors?
Yeah.
There's a great possibility of using the voice, because previously we only been using my voice, and I don't have an actor's background, so they have like a much wider scale to use the voice, which opens up like a whole new world for us. So this is really exciting. And I also find it very interesting to work, I mean, even in Symphony we didn't always work with dancers, sometimes we did work with actors, and vice versa. So I find it interesting to work with people that are not necessarily from that background too, because that brings another layer, another knowledge. Sometimes the resistance is a knowledge in itself, so that we have to learn from them in one way.
In one of our work, a piece that was recently shown in Gothenburg at Röda Sten at the Gothenburg Dance and Theatre Festival, we worked with a priest, a Catholic priest, for particularly, we worked with him a lot, and I think you will recognize him if you have seen our work. Colin, his name is Colin McLean, and he as a priest, he worked with a lot of rituals, and you can really see that in that particular piece.
And he also been in the military, and you can really feel that as well. He's really on time. So yeah, it's interesting when people have different backgrounds.
We have time for one more question. Does somebody? Maybe we can slip into. There you go.
I wonder if you feel like you're part of a movement, because I recognize some of the things you mentioned in the visual art field. For example, Gudmason. What's the Icelandic artist that shows everywhere? Eliasson, sorry. Olaf Eliasson.
Okay, yeah.
And also the Swedish guy who showed a new museum recently. I don't remember his name. And also recently I saw an exhibition with Under the Influence of Hypnosis. This is all within the last year or so I've seen these exhibitions. And they all relate to similar things. And I just wonder if you feel like you're part of a movement and how you relate to the other artists.
I think there is a lot of work within theater within theater there's a notion of immersive theater or one-on-one theater where it's supposed to give a sort of more personal relation to theater, where people are entering either by themselves or they get a more personal experience somehow. And within contemporary art, I think there is an awareness within museums and contemporary art spaces to put up exhibitions and work that somehow engage with the visitors in a different way than it's done before. And of course, then, like if you mention Olaf Eliasson, who is a visual artist, making also work dealing with perception a lot and so on. Yeah, there's a lot of examples.
I'm not so good at placing myself within a movement. I think I'm because when creating, I'm being very immersed in what we are doing, and from each project it changes a lot, so it's difficult to, in order to do that, I almost have to place myself outside of it. And I think it's a really interesting question. Maybe it's easy to do that in relation to our earlier works, but in relation to proscenium, that what we create now, I feel a bit more blurred. But I would like to think about that more.
Thank you.
Thank you. I could sit here and talk all afternoon. In fact, we almost did the other day, because it's endlessly fascinating, but I think we're out of time. And I wanted to thank the audience here and also the audience at home, and Malin and Chris and Martina and Krister. Thank you very much.